But when people try to argue that she's not the face of our league, or if our league would be where we're at without her, you're literally dumb as fuck.
Jealousy of Caitlin Clark was the topic of conversation. Sophie Cunningham was criticizing those who refused to acknowledge that Caitlin Clark is the face of the WNBA.
Cunningham letting it all out and not holding back one bit. She calls out the old guard. She calls out the people out there who refuse to say Caitlin Clark is the face of the league.
Finally, someone who gets it. Finally. Someone in the WNBA who understands this thing called business.
Hey, Sophie. If they didn't like you then, they sure aren't going to like you now.
Welcome to the Clark Update. I'm back.
Lock in as we dive right into the details. Seriously, take a moment to visualize this. Imagine you own a professional basketball team. Finally, you land the most popular player in the entire sport. The arenas are packed. TV viewership has literally tripled. The endorsement deals are rolling in like never before. Then, just months after a brutal playoff series where a rival coach watched her players physically target your young star, causing bruises and bleeding, you turn around and hire that exact same coach to run your franchise. This is not some hypothetical scenario. The Indiana Fever did exactly that, and the floodgates opened when a top player spoke up. Sophie Cunningham finally went on a podcast and said exactly what every fan has been screaming at their screens. We are breaking down this entire situation piece by piece today. If you are enjoying this, hit that like button and subscribe. Believe it or not, over 73% of you watching right now are not subscribed. It is totally free and takes just a second, but it helps us out immensely. So, are you subscribed? Awesome. We appreciate the support. Now, let's get right back to the action. By the end of this, you will have a clear understanding of why so many passionate fans believe there is a serious problem in the WNBA. First, we have to set the stage. You need to know what Caitlin Clark actually represents to this league to understand why fans are so furious. The Indiana Fever drafted Caitlin Clark out of the University of Iowa as the #1 overall pick back in April of 2024. This was not just some ordinary draft selection. During her final 2 college seasons, Clark had shattered record after record. By the time she finished, she was the all-time leading scorer in NCAA Division I history, men's or women's. Let that sink in. She had more points than Pete Maravich, more than Kelsey Plum, more than anyone in college basketball history. She brought a style of play that women's basketball had simply never seen at that kind of volume. Logo three-pointers from deep, incredible no-look passes that left defenders completely frozen on the court. In terms of pace and swagger, watching her was much closer to Steph Curry than any traditional point guard. And because of that, she drew massive ratings. Her college game shattered every single viewership record in the book. More people watched her final game at Iowa than watched the men's national championship game that same year. That women's championship averaged 18.9 million viewers. Nothing even close to that had ever happened before. So when she entered the league in May of 2024, the Indiana Fever became way more than just a basketball team. Almost overnight, they became the most watched product in women's sports. Tickets that went for $15 or $20 a year prior were suddenly fetching hundreds. Opposing teams actually had to move games to larger arenas to handle the massive crowds. After more than 20 years of begging the league, WNBA players finally got approval for full-time charter flights. And most players will tell you off the record that one single rookie is the reason for it all. But this is where the story takes a dark turn, because all of this did not sit well with everyone in the league. Not even close. From the very first preseason game, it was clear that Caitlin Clark was not getting a warm welcome. The league's veterans had a term for what was happening. They called it paying your dues. And night after night, we saw exactly how they planned to collect. Just weeks into her rookie year in June of 2024, Chindy Carter of the Chicago Sky shoulder-checked Clark to the floor on a dead ball, meaning the whistle had already blown and play had stopped. She got launched into the air right as the whistle blew, and at first, the league just called it a common foul. They actually upgraded it to a flagrant one, only after massive public outcry and those viral slow-motion replays. But the message to this league rookie was already sent: this is what is going to happen to you. Later that summer, Chicago Sky player Diamond DeShields hit Caitlin Clark with another hard body check that sent her crashing to the floor. And once again, the hit went down nowhere near the ball. Once again, the league upgraded it to a flagrant after the game was over. Same script, different opponent, different night. Then, during a game against the Connecticut Sun on June 17th, 2025, things got even worse. Sun guard JCS Sheldon jabbed Caitlin Clark right in the eye, and then Clark was shoved to the floor by Maisha Hines Allen. A short while later, the Fever bench completely erupted in order to protect and defend Sophie Cunningham, who was traded to the Fever in the offseason as she left her feet, rushed in, and physically intervened. Cunningham's jersey sales absolutely skyrocketed overnight after that video of her standing up for Caitlin Clark went viral. Fans had been waiting for someone to step up. At last, someone did. But none of those wild incidents, including the ones with Carter, DeShields, JCS Sheldon, and Maisha Hines-Allen, quite match what went down in the 2024 postseason. That is where things get real. Before we go there, let us look at something I think a lot of older fans noticed, but the national media completely chose to ignore. Caitlin Clark led the entire WNBA in flagrant fouls during her rookie year in 2024. Let that sink in for a second. In her very first season, the #1 overall pick took more flagrant hits than anyone else in the league. That is not normal. No matter how hyped they are, most rookies never have to deal with that. We can debate if that was just her style, a total coincidence, or if it was actually something more intentional. People are always going to disagree on that. But at the end of the day, that stat is a hard fact sitting in the box scores. It is also a huge reason why fans started questioning how the league was protecting its most valuable new superstar. And the way the rest of the league talked about her was wild too. Multiple players made it extremely clear they did not like the spotlight she was getting. Rookie Angel Reese actually used the term special whistle to describe what she saw as preferential treatment by the refs for Caitlin Clark. In her interviews, multiple veterans kept talking about how Caitlin Clark needed to earn her stripes and be humbled. Sure, you can call some of that standard rookie veteran hazing. Every league has it. But this was totally next level when it came to the sheer volume, intensity, and noise on social media. Even Sophie Cunningham would later point out that the root of all this drama had absolutely nothing to do with basketball. September 22nd, 2024, the Mohegan Sun Arena in Unisville, Connecticut. Game 1 of the WNBA opening round. The Indiana Fever are set to battle the Connecticut Sun in their first playoff game since 2016. And on the opposite sideline was Connecticut Sun head coach Stephanie White. Do not forget that name, because she is the second major character in this story. Less than 2 minutes into the first quarter, Caitlin Clark made a simple pass to Aaliyah Boston. Sun guard DiJonai Carrington flew in to try and break up the pass right as it left her hands. And as her hand came down, a long acrylic fingernail poked straight into Caitlin Clark's right eye. Clark went down immediately, clutching her face. 0 whistles. No foul called. Play just kept going. Now, I want to be completely fair here. After the game, both DiJonai Carrington and Caitlin Clark publicly insisted that the eye poke was not on purpose. When a reporter asked Caitlin Clark about it the next day, she basically shrugged it off, saying it was not intentional by any means. If you watch the play, it clearly was not intentional. We need to stick to the actual facts here, not conspiracy theories. But this is also true that long fingernail caught her right in the eye. By the time she walked off the court, she had a visible black eye. And she struggled, shooting just 4 of 17 in a brutal 24-point blowout loss. Whether that play was on purpose or not, the physical toll was real. That shot of the league's #1 draft pick down on the hardwood holding her face instantly became one of the most famous images in WNBA history. The Connecticut Sun took Game 1, then they took Game 2. Just like that, they swept the Indiana Fever right out of the postseason. And watching it all from the opposite bench was head coach Stephanie White, whose squad had just sent Caitlin Clark and the Fever packing for the winter. If you are an Indiana Fever fan, you remember every single second of that series. The eye poke, the hard fouls, the bruises, all that trash talk and the sinking feeling that your young star had just gone through a meat grinder. When the news finally breaks, you think, oh, right, we lost. We need to get a lot tougher. We need a coach who is going to protect our franchise player and finally take this team to that next level. The Indiana Fever officially announced their decision to fire head coach Christy Sides on October 27, 2024. Sides had just finished a 20-20 season, leading her squad to their first playoff berth in 8 long years. She had performed her duties well by all standard metrics. The front office, however, clearly desired more. They wanted a championship-caliber coach. They were looking for someone who could truly transform this generational talent into a champion. Who did they recruit next? The Fever officially announced their choice on November 1st, just a few days later. Stephanie White was named their new head coach. Yes, Stephanie White indeed. Just 6 weeks earlier, Stephanie White had watched from the sidelines as her own squad sent Caitlin Clark packing from the playoffs with a black eye. And you are definitely not the only one perplexed by that. Social media fans went completely wild, and in a matter of minutes, those hashtags began to trend. It was flat out unbelievable to fans. The front office selected the exact same coach whose aggressive defensive scheme had just battered their budding star to guide her through year 2. However, in order to be completely fair, we must now pause and look at the other perspective. Stephanie White is definitely not some random haphazard hire. Her resume is very tough to dispute, and she is a real basketball enthusiast. She was a legendary high school star at Seagar High in West Lebanon, having been born and raised right here in Indiana. In 1999, she guided Purdue University to the national championship, which remains the only Big Ten Conference women's basketball championship in history. After that, she spent 4 of her 5 professional WNBA seasons playing with the Indiana Fever. In 2011, she returned to Indianapolis as an assistant coach, and by 2012, she was on the coaching staff when the Fever captured their lone championship. After that, she was head coach of the Fever during 2015 and 2016. She eventually returned to the WNBA with the Connecticut Sun after leaving her job coaching Vanderbilt, where she finished a combined 55 and 25 in her 2 seasons. In both years, she advanced to the semifinals, and in 2023, she was named Coach of the Year. By any objective standard, this is easily one of the absolute greatest basketball minds in the women's game. So, this was not viewed as any kind of betrayal by the front office. It was simply a return home. The legendary Indiana basketball star is back to guide the franchise she helped establish. At least, that is the clean version of the story from the official press release. Here is the problem, though. Fans do not live inside polished press announcements. They are right there in the moment. The majority of Indiana Fever supporters clearly recalled their 22-year-old star kneeling and clutching her injured face. So the comment sections were naturally not very friendly when the official announcement was made. But at this exact point in the story, things get pretty intriguing because an insider finally began to speak. And Sophie Cunningham is that person. Here is a brief introduction to who Sophie Cunningham is. For those who do not know, she was the 2nd highest scorer in school history while playing college basketball at the University of Missouri. Back in 2019, she was drafted by the Phoenix Mercury. During her 6 seasons out in Phoenix, she developed a reputation as a tough, physical guard who was never scared to mix it up with anyone. Then, she was traded to the Indiana Fever in February of 2025, and suddenly, she and Clark were sharing the same locker room, and she made it quite clear whose side she was on almost immediately. When that eye poke and shove went down on June 17th, Cunningham was the one who immediately jumped in to intervene. Her jersey sales reportedly skyrocketed right after that game. She embraced the Clark's Enforcer nickname that fans started to give her. In July 2025, Cunningham and co-host Wes Wilson from the Bravo series Summer House established their own podcast called Show Me Something. She does not hold back in that first episode, where she is asked directly about those claiming Clark is not the face of the WNBA. And this is pretty much exactly what she said. When someone says she is not the face of the league, that literally irritates me. Like what? In our league, there are some excellent, well-known individuals. I am not disparaging them. There are a lot of real badasses in our league, yes, without a doubt. But you are just as stupid as Jay if you try to claim that she is not the face of our league or that we would even be where we are today without her. You really are as stupid as hell. You get the whole concept. Even though I somewhat edited that quote for transmission, her rage did not end there. She declared that this is what we have always wanted as a league. She continued, and I will quote her once more, "Who matters who gets the credit then? Additionally, you can easily profit from them if you are intelligent. The viewership is actually generating major revenue for you. Let that settle in for a second because according to her own words, what she is doing on her own show is effectively criticizing every single coach and player in the league who has harbored deep animosity toward Clark. Look, the money is up. She says the ratings have increased. At last. The charter flights are available. This league is beneficial to all. She claims that anyone who is blind to that or too envious to acknowledge it is as stupid as F. It is not subtle at all. In her first season on a new squad, that veteran player went on record to claim that jealousy exists in this league and is causing individuals to act foolishly. Sophie Cunningham, a vocal player, would only say that aloud since she has personally witnessed it. She has visited those changing areas. She has heard those discussions. She is aware. Now, since Sophie Cunningham was mostly ignored by casual fans until this tale took off, I want to take a moment to tell you a little bit more about her. In actuality, she has long been among the WNBA's most fascinating personalities. All you needed to do was know where to search. Columbia, Missouri is where she was raised. At Missouri, her mother was a basketball player. Her 2 elder sisters were Missouri basketball players. You guessed it, Sophie continued her basketball career at the University of Missouri. By the time she graduated from college, she was the program's second highest scorer, only surpassed by Joan Cronin. She started for 4 straight years. During a preseason scrimmage, she was the type of player who would throw herself on the floor to get a loose ball. Her reputation from college carried right over into the pros. She was selected with the 13th overall pick by the Phoenix Mercury in the 2019 draft. She was a gritty role-playing guard who would do the dirty work for 6 seasons in Phoenix, making her the kind of player every single coach adores. Hard fouls in the paint, guard spot rebounds, and locking down defense. She wasn't, depending on the season, she usually averaged anywhere between 6 and 10 points per game. But her high-energy play in Phoenix made her a true fan favorite. Just look at the 2022 playoff game video showing her getting into a physical brawl with the entire Las Vegas Aces bench. That tells you everything you need to know about Sophie Cunningham. Specifically, how she, the Phoenix Mercury, and the Indiana Fever executed a trade in February of 2025, where Cunningham signed a 3-team contract with Indianapolis. Just like that, she and Caitlin Clark were suddenly playing on the same squad. For the supporters who had witnessed that terrible first season, this transaction seemed almost too good to be true. Because when things get tough, Sophie Cunningham is the exact player you want standing next to your franchise star. The two of them became close almost instantly, and Cunningham now discusses Clark on her show with a passion that is impossible to fake. They can be critical of one another, and they constantly make fun of each other in public. Cunningham made that statement about negotiating her new contract with the Fever in a moment of complete and total candor. Let me quote her again. She said it was never about the money because she was recovering from a serious knee injury, and she just wanted to be with them. So, for her, it was entirely about the years. A girl is allowed to love her teammates, God forbid. This is not some player playing public relations games. That is a basketball player who finally settled in, which is exactly why her testimony on the entire Stephanie White situation is so very critical. Because Sophie Cunningham is simply not a person who is seeking influence. She is not attempting to create some fake controversy just to secure herself a book deal. After spending 7 seasons in this league as a journeyman professional, she has finally found a team and a teammate that she truly loves for the very first time in her career. When she speaks out about the jealousy, the contempt, and what is actually going on inside those locker rooms, she is speaking from the perspective of someone with absolutely nothing left to prove and nothing to gain by lying. More than anything else, that is precisely why the things she stated on her podcast struck such a deep emotional chord. Here is what I believe is truly crucial to understand. When Sophie Cunningham said all of those things on her podcast, she was not just standing up to defend her friend. Whether she meant to or not, she was validating what millions of casual basketball fans have already been saying for over a year. This is something that traditional sports media outlets and the Players Association and the league have been actively trying to write off as nothing more than irate fans complaining on Twitter. But think about who Sophie Cunningham actually is. She is no rookie. She is not trying to establish herself in this league. She has played in the WNBA for 7 years and has even competed in the championship game. She has been around this league long enough to know exactly what goes on behind closed doors and how those locker rooms actually operate. So when someone with her level of professional credibility looks directly into a microphone and refers to the treatment of Caitlin Clark as jealousy, it is simply no longer just some wild fan theory. That is an active, working professional sharing her personal, first-hand observations with you on her own platform. And here is the other part. She did not say it just once. For example, when sports analyst Skip Bayless suggested during a later episode of her podcast that some of Clark's injuries during the 2025 season were actually mental breaks brought on by veteran jealousy, Cunningham fired right back, and I quote, "That is literally bull. No one is lying." She went on to say that when you are an elite-level player, not being able to play is the hardest part, mentally, physically, and emotionally. She was clearly stepping up her efforts. Now, connect the dots to Stephanie White. DiJonai Carrington was coached by Stephanie White for 2 full seasons. Under White, Carrington actually won the WNBA, a Most Improved Player award in 2024. So, when Stephanie White got hired by the Indiana Fever, fans were not looking at her resume. They remembered Carrington was on her squad. They recall everything. They remember exactly how Carrington's fingernail poked Clark right in the eye, and they remember no foul was called. They remember Stephanie White watching from the sideline, never subbing her player out, and never even offering an apology. Now, that very same coach is in charge in Indiana, and fans are furious. But this is about more than just the hire. It is about what this hiring actually represents. Let us look at the fan reaction because, honestly, that is the wildest part of this whole situation. To many fans watching at home, it felt like the league looked at the most aggressive, physical defensive coach in the sport, whose team literally left a trail of bruises on the league's biggest star, and said, you know what? Let us put her in charge of that exact star, and let us see how that goes. On November 1st, 2024, the Fever's social media accounts were absolutely flooded with angry comments right after they announced the hiring. People were calling it a straight-up betrayal, and some even called it sabotage. Reports surfaced of fans canceling their season tickets, and the word boycott started trending all over Facebook. Grown men and women were writing novel-length rants about how the front office had completely failed the team. Sports talk radio in Indy was absolutely blowing up with calls, and the story led the afternoon slate on national networks. Now, let's keep it real here because this is important. Some of that reaction was definitely over the top. A lot of that came from casual viewers who only follow one player, instead of keeping up with the whole league. To be fair to Stephanie White, the decision to hire her was built on solid basketball logic. After they overcame their slow start, the 2024 Fever had the best per-possession defense in the WNBA. But overall, their defensive rating ranked them 10th out of 12 playoff teams, and you just cannot win like that. If you want to win a championship, playing defense is mandatory. No matter your opinion on Stephanie White, she built her career as an elite defensive coach. But fans do not sit around watching spreadsheets. They watch their favorite player get poked in the face with no whistle. They watch their 22-year-old star get battered for 40 minutes while a coach stands on the sideline with her arms crossed. So, looking at it strictly from a fan's perspective, the emotional logic of this hire was broken from day one, even if the basketball side made sense. And just days after the announcement, another detail leaked out. According to reports from the Chicago Sun-Times, the Fever were already planning to hire Stephanie White before they even let Christy Sides go. Think about that. They were actively negotiating with her replacement while Christy was still on the job. Now, depending on how you read the league bylaws, that move might actually violate some league rules. But to the fans, it just looked messy and completely intentional. It felt like the front office had already locked in on White before Christy Sides even had time to pack up her desk. And honestly, the PR hit from that did not do them any favors. So, now the hire is official. The fan outrage is real, and Sophie Cunningham is basically saying what everyone is thinking on her show. Now, let us pivot to what actually went down on the hardwood. When the 2025 WNBA season tipped off in May, the early returns were either highly encouraging or deeply concerning, depending on your perspective. Because when Clark was out there, the basketball looked great. Clark averaged 16.5 points, 5 rebounds, 8.8 assists, and 1.6 steals, and 2.2 three-pointers per game under Stephanie White, making her second straight All-Star team in the process. The offense looked super smooth, and the entire group seemed incredibly organized. The real problem was that Caitlin Clark could barely stay on the court. She suffered a quad injury early on, then a groin issue, followed by another groin injury. Then came a fourth muscle strain, limiting her to just 13 games during the entire regular season. Eventually, the Fever made the call to shut her down completely for the rest of the year. By the midpoint of the season, she spent almost the entire year watching from the bench in street clothes, their generational star, the player whose very existence changed the league's economics. Doctors, trainers, and analysts have been debating the exact cause of these injuries all year long, with many pointing to the intense physical toll of her rookie season. Just think about the way she was constantly getting knocked around, fouled, and targeted, while others blamed her playing in an international tournament during the offseason. And some actually suggested those injuries were partly psychological, most notably Skip Biz on his own show. Now, Sophie Cunningham was vehemently opposed to that whole psychological theory, and in her own words, she called it total bull. According to her, being unable to play is simply the toughest thing in the world for any elite player. Without hesitation, she stood up for her teammate, but this is still extremely hard to overlook. Look, Stephanie White's actual coaching was never the main focus of her rookie year. The real story was the physical toll on Caitlin Clark. And those online comment sections lit up all over again every time Clark went down. People started blasting the Fever strength and conditioning staff for pushing her too hard, saying things like, "See, this is what happens when you hire the coach who hates her." But honestly, there was zero concrete proof of that. But the moment they hired Stephanie White, that narrative was locked in, and every single injury only served to solidify it further. Let's trace back to DiJonai Carrington, because this is where the story gets really personal. After she was drafted back in 2021, Carrington bounced around the league for a bit before landing with the Connecticut Sun, where she had a massive breakout year in 2024 under Stephanie White. She averaged nearly 13 points a game and became an absolute nightmare for opposing defenses to handle. She was also voted the league's most improved player, as we already know. But Carrington was quickly becoming known for something else, too. She was no fan of Caitlin Clark, or at least she never hesitated to show some real attitude toward Clark and her fan base. Following a Sun versus Fever matchup in August 2024, Carrington posted online that the Indiana Fever had the absolute worst fans in the entire WNBA. And I'm cleaning this up. Throughout the year, she jumped into constant online debates over racism, Clark, and the rapid evolution of the league. Usually, professional athletes do not have a real advantage over players on a different squad. Then, during a high-stakes playoff game, she accidentally poked Clark in the eye, though both players insisted it was just an accident. That slow-motion replay was pretty blurry, but Carrington explained her side of it, saying she did not even understand why she would ever try to poke someone in the eye. That makes zero sense to me, and I did not even know I hit her. She claimed she was just trying to make a play on the ball, but the optics were terrible. Still, she has every right to defend herself. During that playoff game, a player on a Stephanie White coach team who had been openly sparring with Caitlin Clark all season made direct contact with her eye. And just a few weeks later, Stephanie White was brought in to coach Clark. You do not have to be a conspiracy theorist to understand why fans immediately made that connection. And what happened next with Carrington only made things worse, as the Connecticut Sun decided to blow things up and part ways with most of their veterans. Ultimately, the Dallas Wings acquired Carrington in a trade, the very player who had been the face of that on-court beef and whose finger poked Clark in the eye. She was no longer playing for Stephanie White because White had left for Indiana and Carrington was headed to Dallas. So the 2024 Sun roster that had knocked out the Fever was basically gone. But the memory of that playoff series remained, and those video clips were still all over the internet. Every highlight reel still showed that infamous black eye. Every single time Stephanie White stepped onto the Fever sideline in 2025, fans at home and in the arena could not help but remember exactly what went down the year before. But this whole story is about way more than just one coach and one player. Let us take a step back and look at the bigger picture. It is the story of a league that fought for nearly 30 years to find its footing, and is now suddenly forced to figure out how to manage massive success. Ever since the WNBA was founded back in 1996, the league has been a labor of love for most of its existence. Players flew commercial, teams folded, and early TV deals were incredibly tiny. A small but incredibly loyal fan base kept things afloat, and for years there was only a hope that the sport would eventually break through. But then, one singular player changed everything and triggered the ultimate breakthrough. The raw numbers simply do not lie. Whether you absolutely love Caitlin Clark or are totally sick of hearing her name, television viewership for WNBA games skyrocketed threefold, and every arena she played in set all-time attendance records. Sponsorship money poured in, and that massive wave of interest was directly linked to the historic media rights deal announced in 2024, paying the WNBA about $2.2 billion over 11 years. That is not some casual fan's perspective. When they announced the deal, the CEOs themselves openly stated as much. This is the awkward issue over at Volume.